The environment's absolutely fundamental to human life and existence and well-being, so it's important for the kind of spiritual aspect of people, but just their straight survival. 50% of the world's poorest people still depend on the natural environment for their livelihoods, so it's really crucial stuff. That's what made me really fired up about the environment. I think the great thing about being a chartered environmentalist is that it's very broad and inclusive. We've got engineers, we've got water people, we've got ecologists, we've got all sorts of professions, and that is a sign of just how the environment needs to be embedded in every single policy area, in every single professional area, if we're really going to do a good job in making sure that as we grow and develop a better world for people, that recognises the importance of the environment as the basic building blocks of that happening. I think we're blessed in this country that we've got a very strong Climate Change Act, but we need to make sure that the government continues to play a lead role globally in ensuring that climate change policy is taken forward. We were a key player as part of a European group at Paris, and we now need to make sure that our place in the world in taking forward the climate change agenda is really central. The biggest challenge for me in the Brexit issue is agriculture policy, because it does seem to me that that's a really big opportunity to think for ourselves, to think about how we do use land for the future and how we make sure that every single land manager, whatever their primary objective is, food or timber, is thinking about environmental outcomes in terms of biodiversity and social outcomes in terms of floods and climate change and all of the issues about human and mental health. And that's the challenge. So I'm kind of waiting to see what happens with the negotiations and the common market, the single market, because that's for me the biggest determinant.
One of the wonderful things about the European Union is that when the UK is pushing forward on environmentalism, it gives us the opportunity to tell the world about it and to magnify our influence. So thinking of things like climate change. And the other side of the coin is that when we're not doing so well, when we want to deregulate and when we want to take away environmental rules, the EU acts as a brake and holds us into the commitments we've made. And the panel tonight hinted at a way to do that, even in a post-EU environment. So we heard about the possibility of national legislation to set binding targets for things like air quality and water quality and species. And that's the sort of thing we really need to make sure that without the EU there to bind us in, we can't go back on the environment when things get tough. And on the other side of the coin, on international leadership, it will definitely be harder when we don't have a seat at the table in the EU. But we also heard that there will be opportunities for us to lead in areas where the UK is really good at things. So at the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust, we're particularly interested in things like natural capital accounting, where the UK definitely leads the world on the academic side of things. If we can really blaze a trail and put that at the heart of government policy, then we can still show some leadership around the world. We know that there are millions of people in the UK who are absolutely passionate about nature, about countryside, about wildlife and biodiversity. And they're just looking for a rallying point to express themselves. And organisations like Society for the Environment really can be that rallying point at this stage. So to harness that power, the different groups have got to play to their own strengths. Wildlife and Countryside Link is brilliant at detailed policy. Green Alliance is fantastic at opening political doors. And Society for the Environment is brilliant at things like tonight, where you can bring scientific and professional expertise to bear on a question. So for the next few months, we all need to come together and speak with one voice to say that the one thing we all agree on is that post-Brexit, the protections that we enjoy for the natural environment must not only be as strong as they were in the EU, they need to get stronger if we're to turn around declines in the natural world.
I think there was talk about opportunities, and although I would rather we from an environmental perspective, we remained in the EU. I think if we're going to leave, there are opportunities, and it was good to hear those being talked about. I think the concern is that realising those opportunities does depend on political will within government, and the environment is a competing interest within the political spectrum, and we know that generally it is quite a weak interest. So I'm not confident that there will be the political will to realise opportunities to improve or even maintain our environmental protection. Historically, we're not very good at doing that within the environmental sector, and that's our biggest downfall, I think. So we've really got to seize this opportunity, and we've got to work together. We've got to find those common interests, those common commitments that we want to see, and we've got to work together and collaboratively to then get those messages across and to help government actually achieve them. And that's going to be quite a challenge for us. As I say, it's not something traditionally we're very good at doing. So we need leadership. Maybe that's something the Society for the Environment could provide. We need leadership, and we need to come together, and we won't agree on everything, but we need to decide what are the clear messages, the clear asks that we want this government to deliver, and how we can help them deliver it. We have a responsibility to be giving good, sound, evidence-based advice, and we need to work together to do that across all our chartered environmentalist specialisms.
I think in 41 years I've lived through seeing improvements in water quality, improvements in habitat. Britain, the knowledge, the skills that we have, the chartered environmentalist, the chartered engineer qualification can be a force for good in the world. It's really important to look after people, to make sure that they've got clean, wholesome supply of water, that our waste is treated properly, that we're able to feed ourselves, and then to make sure that we look after the wider environment, because we never know. We can't predict what's just around the corner.
Well, first of all, when I arrived, I was very encouraged by the number of young people there. The number of, in knowing also that there were these 60 undergraduates also live streaming into the event, I felt like the audience was super engaged. So that part I thought was brilliant, really important to have all those young people there. People want to talk about climate change. Climate change underpins absolutely everything. It is key to food security. The debate focused very much on food security. We cannot have a sensible conversation about food security in the UK, in Europe, or more broadly, without talking about climate change. Enormous volume of wonderful science, that suggests that our impact on the climate, our impact on land, and how that's all being used is going to have a massive effect on whether or not we can feed 2 billion more people by the end of the century. And so, whilst I thought some very, very important points were raised, some real nuanced conversation about the common agricultural policy and pros and cons of European legislation around that, I think the bigger question is, what are we going to do about climate change? And the UK has got lots of brilliant climate change scientists, lots of people working in policy from top down and bottom up, organisations that are based in the UK, working to sort of make sure that all these brilliant people have an influence on not just UK climate policy but global climate policy. And there's a sense, and the great worry in the audience, that one result of Brexit is that we might have reduced our power to influence those processes. And the reason I came, I want to hear from those people that should be fully engaged with it. What are they going to do? Well, how are they going to make sure that we still have that influence? How are they going to make sure that we still have an impact on something that I see as absolutely fundamental to everything else?